Welcome, everyone. This is Invictus Knox. I am with a man called
Dash Retro is me.
And that's Dash Retro, and we are all the way down. Well, at least we'll get all the way down. Today's episode 35, everyone. We were talking about a couple different games today. I have the probably least amount of things to say, so I'm excited to hear what you brought to the table.
Oh, yeah. There's one I've been working on for a while. So this is a perfect example of a game that, like, the first time I brought it up, I had only played it for a couple hours, right? But I was excited to talk about it. But then I didn't.
Can I rudely interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
You actually, I just now remembered, right before we went live, you said you kind of also wanted to talk about something Sony had announced. So did you want to talk about games first, or do you want to go into what Sony was talking about with this
right.
streaming?
Okay. Yeah. Hey, great intro that we got going on here.
Yeah, we're live planning. Yeah.
I was gonna say, before we get right into game talk, sometimes it's fun to just bullshit for a second. How you been, Knox? We actually haven't done an episode in like a month because things kept coming up. So actually the first thing that came up was I was super sick a couple weeks ago. I got the big COVID, and so I was pretty out for a couple days there. One of the days being podcast day. And then like the next week, I think you were busy or something. How's it been going?
It's been going pretty steadily, but today was a pretty nice day because I actually got to go out on a ride, which I don't get to do very often. And that's pretty badass because I got to go with a friend who has been talking forever about getting his license. And he finally did. I'm fucking proud of him. And he got a new fucking bike. And we went on our first ride today. And he went and did swimmingly. He screeched the tires real bad on a turn, but that was my fault. I signaled way too early. But he recovered, man. He was awesome. Seeing a new rider, having a good time. Actually, like going through like where we kind of went around the city. Mostly did like this awesome by the river, kind of just windy road with some pretty views. It's good. It's good stuff for a first-time rider for sure.
Excellent. So, my parents are motorcycle people also. So I'm curious as to like what kind of motorcycle are you into for the layman, right?
I am into all of them, but I currently own a cruiser. And for those who don't know what a cruiser is, basically it's what you typically think of when you see a Harley, but that's the style of motorcycle is called a cruiser, which it encompasses Harley Davidson Indian, who I own. I have an Indian Scout, and then there's the all the Japanese cruisers and Japanese manufacturers that make cruisers as well, which I'm also a pretty big fan of because those tend to be a lot more reliable.
Nice. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
It with like the weather and stuff, it's actually finally starting to be like motorcycle weather around here.
And it's harder for you because you're way up north in Minnesota.
Right. So now that we're in the latter half of May, it's finally warming up enough to where we're hearing motorcycles around again.
Yeah, that's another thing too. Like you'll hear them a lot more, and then it's like, oh yeah, they exist, which is nice because then other people start kind of getting. They get mentally prepared, I guess, to start looking out for people on motorcycles, which is super helpful. So yeah.
Yeah. Now, is that part of the so when I think of like, oh, there's motorcycles out, partly I also just think of like how fucking loud some of them are. Is that part of it? Is like a safety thing?
Yeah, it is. It's there's the saying, "Loud pipes save lives," which is if you can hear me before you see me, then you know to look out for me. It's kind of that general idea. But also it's like, there's lots of arguing back and forth on statistics and all, and how does it really help or like does it hinder, all sorts of things. But I'm definitely in the former camp, and also I kind of don't care because it sounds badass. So, it's different when you actually control the hand on the throttle. Like, yeah, it's annoying as fuck if you don't like appreciate every engine, every style of engine will have its own different kind of exhaust note, It's a thing to appreciate. And, like, if you're not into that, I totally get it just being a bunch of noise. That But for someone like me, I can hear like a group of motorcycles or cars for that matter, and like I can vaguely kind of distinctly go, okay, that's a Subaru WRX, that's a Honda Goldwing, because you won't be able to hear it if you see it. But if it ever has modified exhaust, they're badass because they're little flat six engines, like a little Subaru engine anyway. But yeah, you can tell the difference between a Harley sound and like a Suzuki Cruiser. You can tell like they have what's called a common crank pin, which is a fancy mechanical word for saying it has less parts in it, and all the firing order is to accommodate to the kind of the single, like, I'm explaining this not so well, but essentially it's got its own phase and rotation and sound that gives it that distinct kind of engine noise, and it's just something. It's like they've even tried to trademark that. Like I think they took Honda to court, I think, in the early 2000s because they made an engine that also had a common crank pin design, and therefore the firing sounded like a Harley. I mean, they lost the lawsuit, but it was just silly that they would go to court over something like that. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess like that recognizability for brand is, I mean, that it is like one of the most important things for a brand, right? I mean, that's why trademark law exists in the first place.
Yeah, it's just funny though, because Harley is like one of those companies that they would rather be litigious if they can, rather than develop a competing product that works as well.
Yeah.
Like they have a long history of having or in lobbying the U.S. government to impose tariffs on motorcycles from abroad that, they start putting size restrictions on the engines, and that's why in the 90s you mostly see like 700, 600, 800 cc motorcycles, and then a little bit later on they were allowed to bring their bigger ones over because those tariffs were bullshit, and Americans want big engines because we have roads that you can be on for like a week at a time. There's so much shit here. We need a good strong engine that will rev low at the highway speed and not be screaming, and then just be able to give you power when you need it. It's like that's all we need. And they were like, okay, well, Harley is your only choice for that. Because of Harley.
Right. That's super interesting. Yeah, I mean, I should say I wasn't particularly trying to go to bat for that kind of over litigiousness.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I hate it. It's stupid.
Yeah. A lot of the time it can deter a lot of progress and stuff. Kind of relates to video games a bit in that like Nintendo. Trademarking the D-pad or trademark. I don't know.
Did they?
If it's D-pad? The right word. Yeah, the D-pad was Nintendo had a specific, I don't know what the right word is. If it's a patent, a copyright, a trademark, what?
Yeah.
One of those things, right? The specific like plus sign design was a Nintendo trademark or patent or whatever. I'm sorry, I don't know which one it is.
I would get that if it was accompanied with an A and B button in like an exact specific pattern to where you could 100% for sure say that's an NES controller, that's a Game Boy. You know what I mean? Like that would make sense. But if it's just a D-pad, fuck you. And
well,
I believe it's because it's Nintendo. They do themselves no favors.
Well, the thing is that buttons already existed, right?
Yeah.
But before the NES controller, a game controller was like a fucking paddle
joystick.
Or like the NES joystick, or not NES, the Atari joystick,
or a knob,
kind of shit, right?
Yeah.
But they all had buttons. Nintendo invented the D-pad.
Did they really invent it?
Yeah.
No.
I think it was first on like the Game & Watch systems,
it must have been it because it had to be super early, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is Game & Watch early 80s?
I don't know the dates exactly, but I mean it would have to be, right?
I'll look it up. Go for it.
But yeah, so they invented the D-pad, and yeah, they put a patent on it or whatever, and that's part of the reason that all other D-pads for years and years were slightly different, right? No one just copied Nintendo. You had Sega had their disc, right? That it had a raised D-pad on, or like plus sign on it, but the chunk was a disc, right? And then Sony with the PlayStation, they've got the segmented D-pad, where like the whole thing It's got an up, down, left, and right. The whole thing is one piece of plastic,
Mm-hmm.
but the exposed part on top is just the 4 different sections.
Yeah.
And yeah, the reason for all that is because they had to differentiate it. They had to make it legally distinct from the Nintendo D-pad.
So I didn't know that, but yeah, it was straight up. First of all, I was spot on with the Game & Watch, literally 1980 to 1991, and yeah, it was the first. Yeah, it was the first appearance of the D-pad, engineered by Gunpei Yokoi, which badass, honestly, like badass. One of the best names ever to have been at Nintendo, even though he's probably responsible for a lot of lawsuits. But like, I'm such a big Game Boy fanatic. Like, I can't help but love anything Gunpei Yokoi did because it started with the Game & Watch.
Right. And it's one of those things where it's like I mean, you got to be of two minds of it. Like first, like yes, it is restrictive to the like development of competition, which is restrictive to the overall quality of the industry or of what's coming out of the industry, perhaps to have this litigiousness to it, right? But at the same time, if you invent something and it totally revolutionizes the art form, right? You kind of want to reap the benefits of it for a little while, right?
Wait a minute. I'm having a little bit of a brain explosion moment here. So I'm just trying to think back, like, because this is completely new to me in my head. So like, I'm trying to think of what consoles have I clearly experienced a D-pad on. PlayStation 1, sure, but it's broken up into 4 pieces. Sega Genesis, yes, but it's still a solid disc. Sega Saturn, same kind of thing. It's actually better, but I think it's still so the D-pad is technically a solid disc, right? It's just exposed with a plus pattern. So the actual whole disc, though, is exposed on the Genesis controller. And that's what a lot of people, myself included, when it came to Mortal Kombat, loved, because it made quarter circle forward movements much easier by just like a transition from your thumb rather than having to force and then kind of like do that weird elbow kind of thing in between the cutout of the plus sign between down and forward. Yeah. And then Dreamcast had a D-pad for sure.
I do not remember what it looked like. Let me look it up.
I'm pretty sure the Dreamcast had a straight up plus D-pad. But before that, I was thinking about the Xbox, but the Xbox had that weird inverted circular shitty D-pad with like the super polished black finish, which, to be honest, I kind of really liked. But that's because I was playing an Xbox where no games used it, and I just thought it felt kind of nifty. So.
And yeah, you're right. The Dreamcast, the D-pad is just like a normal plus sign on it.
So I wonder, like, how did they get that then?
Right. Yeah, I wonder if like there was some talking between the two companies, or if the patent expired by then.
Dude, I couldn't believe how when I found out the GameCube D-pad with how tiny it is was basically the same form, like plastic form, as the Game Boy Advance D-pad. I was like, holy shit. It is the same.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same mold, between those two.
It was nuts.
Similarly, the SNES and the N64 actually also have like the exact same D-pad. I believe you can swap the parts on them, and they work in each other.
SNES and N64 have the same D-pad?
Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure. Also, the Game Boy and the NES have the same fitting buttons. They're a little different though.
Yeah.
The NES brick has concave buttons, and the Game Boy has convex buttons. But the notched cutout of the plastic is the same. So you can actually put Game Boy buttons into an NES controller.
Yeah,
and
I heard
vice versa.
It makes it a little bit more comfortable, doesn't it? I would think it would.
If you're into that, yeah. I like the NES brick controller just how it is, but
I kind of am a little upset that I still don't own a dog bone controller. I remember loving the dog bone controller when I was a kid.
Oh yeah, I might have one, but technically it's a Famicom controller, so the cable is like 2 feet long.
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah, I heard about that. But I think they're still like that was when they did the top loader Famicom, right?
Yeah. So the original Famicom in Japan, the controllers are actually hardwired to the system, And then I've got a AV Famicom, which is the one that looks like a top loader NES, you know.
Yeah.
But still, the controllers that came with that are the plug-in dog bone ones, and they still have really short cables on them.
Yeah.
But anyway,
as far as trademarks go, yeah.
I was gonna say a moment ago that like it's also possible that this whole trademarked D-pad by Nintendo thing is one of those urban legends, and maybe I'm just bullshitting at you without knowing it. And
maybe I should have looked that up first.
It's possible.
Is the D-pad trademarked?
But now we got a little. While you perhaps find an ending to that, there is a little bit of game news out there around Sony and their PlayStation Plus thing. Man, I'm kind of shooting from the hip here because I don't remember the details, but it's an extra cost.
Well, just to close up the last subject, I'm only finding Reddit information where people said indeed it was a patent that they had on the D-pad design. And as of 5 years ago, this top reply said the patent actually went out a few years back, hence why the Xbox One uses a Nintendo-style D-pad, which I never knew. Do they have a Nintendo-style D-pad for the Xbox One controller?
Yeah, it's like the regular plus sign, and that's what that's when I like learned about this is the fact that the patent expired kind of recently. But yeah, that does leave the Dreamcast as a weird thing. I almost wonder if they had to pay them for it or something.
Dreamcast.
I mean, there is stuff like that. Like for example, you know how Apple has the iOS? You know, iOS is the Apple thing, right?
Is that
you know
like?
What I'm talking
are
about?
we just talking about software? Or?
Yeah, just their the operating system on Mac stuff is iOS.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The name iOS was already in use by Cisco for the and it stood for Internet Operating System.
Huh.
It's the operating system that they have on their routers, right?
Makes
so
sense.
Cisco already had iOS on routers, and so for this. I hope I'm not spreading a whole bunch of misinformation here, but I think Apple has to pay royalties to Cisco to use the name iOS for their shit because Cisco had it first. So it's kind of a similar kind of thing where I wonder if there was something like that with the Dreamcast, or if there was some legally distinguishing thing about it that they argued.
Yeah, they did actually license the name iOS to Apple. Huh. That's crazy. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
In terms of, God damn it! Sorry, I have a cat screaming at me. What were you gonna say?
I can hear it. I was gonna move on. But if you've got more to say about the other thing, by all means.
I ran out of things because it's a lot of unverified info. I don't want to go on about it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm a little scattered today as well.
So you were talking about the Sony thing. I think that's what it was. So Sony announced that they're going to have a streaming service and they're going to have games. Is this supposed to be like a competitor to Game Pass?
Well, I wouldn't say so because it's more for older stuff. Okay, maybe that's just me projecting because we are more into older games. But that's kind of what I've heard is that it's like a streaming. So they're adding streamable games to the PlayStation Plus membership. Maybe it's more like Nintendo's online thing where they've got NES and SNES games available and Genesis and N64 now. Okay, so PlayStation Plus is PlayStation's online subscription service to be able to play games online with other people.
Oh my God. Can we just, I just looked this up and I need to go over the plans that they're doing for this. Listen to this naming convention. Okay,
go for it.
There's PlayStation. Okay, first of all, the service is called PlayStation Plus. Mm-hmm. So you're already thinking about a service plus more. So then there's PlayStation Plus Essential, which is now the new base service, I guess. Then there's PlayStation Plus Extra. So there's Plus Extra. And then there's Plus Premium. So
yeah,
that like the naming alone, it's like, okay, Extra? Well, am I getting the same thing from the Extra, or is what I'm getting just better than everything else previously? Like,
yeah, it sounds like I'm going through a fucking car wash, you know?
Right?
So Essential is, like you said, it's the same. It's what you already have if you have PlayStation Plus, and it's $60 a year. That's kind of what it's always been. Extra is going to be $100 a year, and then Premium is going to be $120 a year.
Okay, so actually, there's a little bit more. It's so Essential, which is the base, I guess, is $60 a year. Plus Extra is $99 a year, and Plus Premium is $120 a year.
That's what I just said, except I said 100 instead of 99.
Oh.
I mean, yeah.
Never mind. I think I was reading it. They have this is another thing that's confusing. They have 3 tiers of fucking money.
Payment plans.
Yes,
right?
it's okay. That's payment plans. Yeah,
there's 3 different
for each
different
one.
services, and each one you can pay monthly, quarterly, or yearly. Yeah. So yeah, there's 9 different amounts that you could be paying.
This isn't really that confusing. I'm just making it annoying. Sorry.
Okay, so here's the deal though. So from what people are talking about, right? I want to focus on the main feature, the new feature that people are talking about, which are the like streamable games or the games that you I actually I don't know if they're streamable or if you download them and then you just have to like it does an online check-in to see whether you're still allowed to play it when you boot it. You know, it might be something like that. But anyway, they announced the list of games, and a big deal about it. Look, you're listening to a retro game focused podcast, so we're going to talk about the retro games, all right? We're going to talk about the PlayStation 1 games that are available. Can you believe it? There's going to be PlayStation 1 games that you get to play.
One more question. So we talked about those 3 different plans. Where does PlayStation Now fit into this?
Oh, dude. Yeah, I don't remember. Like, there might be a big Sony nut who's listening to this and is like really mad at how little we know and and shit. But so PlayStation Now, I believe, was a PlayStation 3 thing specifically.
Oh, I think it's still a PS4 thing, at least.
No. I mean, it's on PS4, but it's for playing PS3 games.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, because they can't do PS3 emulation for whatever reason because of the cell processor and whatnot. It's so advanced. And so instead of emulating PS3 on PS4 or 5, instead you stream the game from like a PS3 somewhere else, essentially, right? Like that's kind of what it is. So you're playing like Demon Souls, right? Except the game is running on a machine somewhere else, the PlayStation Now servers, and then the video is streamed to you. You know what I mean?
Why can't it just be
inputs are streamed to the game?
Why can't it just be like Nintendo, where they say, okay, no, so we're gonna take all the complications of all these services out of this. You just pay us little too much, and we'll just give you very little in return. We'll just give you one solid streaming service, and then also you can play online without LAN connections because fuck you.
Yeah, people love to rip on Nintendo for everything all the time. But man,
it's not as complicated.
When you see announcements like this, it makes Nintendo look very good. Let me get to the thing that I'm like trying to talk about here, which is that I'm interested in the idea that PlayStation 1 games are going to be playable on PS5 if you have this new service, right? But you know how many there's going to be? 9. There's 9 games.
9?
Yeah.
How many games were on the PlayStation Classic?
20?
Yeah, what?
And that was a joke.
Yeah.
No, we'll get to that because there's so few games that I can name them all to you right now. There's going to be Ape Escape, Hot Shots Golf, Intelligent Cube, Jumping Flash, Siphon Filter, Mr. Driller, Tekken 2, Worms World Party, and Worms Armageddon. 2 Worms games. There's 9 games here, and 2 of them are Worms games.
Okay, but if that Tekken 2 is good, if it has online play and good netcode, I'm kind of all about that.
Good job on Tekken 2. Yeah, look, they got Tekken 2, they got Ape Escape.
Love Ape Escape.
This is PlayStation. There's no
Final Fantasy.
Crash Bandicoot.
No Crash.
No Crash Bandicoot. No Spyro the Dragon. No Final Fantasy. No Resident Evil. No Tomb Raider. No Twisted Metal.
Damn.
Right? Like, where's all the PlayStation games? It's crazy. Parappa the Rapper, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Tons of stuff that like when you think of PlayStation, all of the games that jump, no Metal Gear Solid, right? All the stuff that jumps out at you immediately, none of it's here, right? Maybe someone goes, PlayStation, oh yeah, I love Ape Escape and Tekken, right? And those people are happy, but like, it's crazy. Like when the PlayStation Classic came out and there were 20 games on it and it did have Metal Gear Solid and Final Fantasy 7 on it, it was still a joke because and nobody bought the thing for $100. People bought it once it got price cut down to like 20, but yeah, so that is the no medieval, right? Yeah. That's what they've announced here. Sure, they might add games later, right? The thing that I'm hearing is, hey, they might add games later. The fine print says that there's going to be up to 350 games available, And it's like, well, this is what they fucking put on their press release of this is the list of games that they are presenting to people to sell the service day one, right? This is the important shit. Yeah, maybe they'll add stuff later, but holy shit, is that a sad list for like if you're interested in PS1, you're not sold at this point. You know?
For sure. Like when you think PS1, I think Ape Escape, but I think Ape Escape at the end of like a top 10 list. You know what I mean? I love Ape Escape, but there's way more iconic series, and it makes me wonder if it's like just it's hard to believe a company as big as Sony can have as much trouble as this would seem to, to describe if things are just stuck in licensing hell. Like, I think Sony has a lot of control over properties and, IPs and shit. So, I don't know. 9 games is, like, not a good starter for sure.
Right, and that's what I wonder with stuff like when we said Crash and Spyro, right? A bunch of turbo nerds are, actually Activision owns those. No, Activision. Yes, we all know that Activision owns Spyro and Crash, right? And maybe Sony couldn't afford them, right? But that's why I brought Twisted Metal, right?
I feel like Activision is probably one of those companies right now that wouldn't mind getting a little bit of income.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder which way that goes. If that's like a please, give us something to relicense these, or if it's a, hey, we're in deep shit and we need way too much money.
Yeah, it could be that too. You never know.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's why I bring up Twisted Metal and Parappa the Rapper and
dude, Twisted Metal is like one. There's another game called Sled Storm, which is a more obscure title, but it was a racing game using snowmobiles. But that game and Twisted Metal are probably single-handedly responsible for why I look like this. Like, I got into Rob Zombie because of those, like, and that was like my early introduction to any kind of like metal sound. So I was all hooked on the demo disc of Twisted Metal 3 and Sledstorm because they had Dragula and Super Beast respectively.
Yeah.
But it's like iconic for the PlayStation 1 at that time, though. What's like okay, give me a top 5 right now that you think of right now when you think PS1.
PS1, I think of Final Fantasy 7, Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil. Brave Prince of Musashi popped into my head, but look, that's not what you think of.
No, yeah. So I was also thinking Battle Arena Toshinden. That's super early.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes, those are the things that pop into your head and you go, no. But yeah, I mean, those are the 3, right? Final Fantasy 7, Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil. Those pop right
Two more.
Twisted Metal, Parappa the Rapper.
Yeah. I think these titles are like, there's so many. PS1's just too good. That's really all it is. I was going to say, I think of right off the bat, Tomb Raider, specifically Tomb Raider 3 for some reason. And then I think Tomba. I think Parappa the Rapper. I think Final Fantasy 8. And then I think Crash Bandicoot. Crash or Spyro. Either one. I love both of them equally.
Yeah, the last two that I said, I think are just because I was already talking about them. But yeah, Crash and Tomb Raider, I would say probably are like more representative,
Yeah.
perhaps, of the system. But anyway,
But
yeah, I
but
just
like
wanted
half
to
of
highlight.
those, aren't on that list. To your point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Well, none of them were. Not a single thing that we just said is on that list. That I read you the whole list. Nothing was on there.
Wait, yeah, you're right. Nothing that I listed. Damn. Although
So,
Tekken 2 was pretty iconic for me, and so was Ape Escape, but like probably not as much as the others.
Yeah. So, right. I just wanted to highlight that. I mean, if you look at like the PS3 selection of games that's on there, Demon Souls is on there, so that's a very good thing. If you look at the PS4 games that are available, Bloodborne's on there. So, okay. And hey, if you really want Medieval, the PS4 version of Medieval will be streamable apparently.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So,
which is
but
good
I mean,
because
as a remake,
I've heard. Well, yeah, I was gonna say I've heard though that the original controls wise is super rough. So I've heard the remake's pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. Medieval is a game. If you go back to it now, it's rough, but it's charming. You know what I mean?
There was another game I think I brought up. It's in the same exact vein that I honestly got it confused with because I thought it was the same developer back at the time. But there is a game called Jersey Devil. Essentially, it is like one of those real low budget attempts at making a mascot for the PlayStation 1. So Jersey Devil is this like it's a platforming game, but it's Halloween themed, and it's like imagine Crash with like maybe a third of the budget.
Yeah, I think I've heard of Jersey Devil in the context of it being discussed whether it's the worst game ever made.
No way it's the worst. There's no way it's the worst. It's not that great, but it's, I would buy it. I would buy it for a physical copy for sure right now if I had it.
But yeah, I mean, I like the idea of to end on a slightly more positive note. I like the idea of having a broad selection of games to play. If you're subscribed to this service to play games online, hey, you've got a bunch of stuff to stream also. I think that that's a good idea. They might build it out later, and that'll be cool. And also, wait, what was the other
one of the things I had a question about was how do you exactly once you've informed me you have to have it on a PS3 somewhere else in the house. I think this is for the PlayStation Now. I was wondering, how do you stream video games? Like, it makes way more sense to me to just download and then temporarily just use.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what streaming is. So it's one of those things where like the word streaming might not necessarily be technically correct as to what's happening, because like in networking terms, right? When you say streaming, you generally mean like you're talking about like UDP data, which is the type of data where when it's sent, there's no acknowledgement sent for the packets, because if anything gets lost, it doesn't matter. You don't need to reacquire things that got lost. Instead just it glitches out for a second, right? But it's a live stream. So you know what I mean?
You'd prefer it to be a video artifact is what I think you're trying to say.
Exactly. Yeah, because normally if you're downloading a file and some of the packets get lost, the server that sent the thing is, when you download a file, every single packet that you receive, your computer sends an acknowledgement to the server that it received the packet. So any that it doesn't receive, the server knows that it didn't get an acknowledgement. It can resend those packets. Boom, you don't get a corrupted file. That is called TCP. That's part of TCP protocol.
TCP/IP, yeah.
But then there's also UDP, which is where there's not acknowledgement sent. So yeah, if you're downloading a file, you get an uncorrupted file every time. If you're streaming data to somebody, it's live, it's now, you're seeing the data as it's coming in. If anything is lost, you just move on, because it's not important anymore. Once the server would theoretically realize that you didn't get the packet, it's no longer relevant data anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's what streaming is. But when you talk about streaming a Netflix show, You know, when it stops and buffers and then it starts playing again, that's because it's not technically actually streaming. You know what I mean? It's not UDP. It's just downloading the thing as you're watching it into a temporary storage.
So that's not
you
buffering, huh? Is
Well-
what you're saying?
Well, buffering means that like it knows that it's it quit getting the data and it has to stop for a second.
Yeah.
And then the server, because the server doesn't get the acknowledgement, so it knows to resend the part of the show that you're stuck at right now. You know what I mean? Instead of it blacking out and then it comes back. Like let's say
Well, you would have to manually go back to where you lost the data.
Right.
If
exactly.
you didn't have it set up how Netflix has it. I never thought about that. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, so like if you're quote unquote streaming like a game, you would imagine that anytime that the game loads, that it's just getting the data from a server instead of from a disk or something, right? But that's not really streaming, because if it fails to load the data, it's gonna know that and it's gonna keep trying, which is different. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
But
it's like if you were just to have an interruption to your radio. Although actually with like internet radio, it'll just be behind the stream. And if you were to refresh the page, you would lose that progress and go right to the live data.
Yeah. Now, yeah, so right, and that's very similar to like Twitch as well, because Twitch is also not streaming necessarily in that sense of the word. When you are streaming to a Twitch server, it's TCP, it's not UDP, and that's why it knows when frames drop, and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's just a really interesting semantic thing.
I never knew any of that. Yeah, I appreciate you telling me that, because that's like, I know that may be over some users' heads, and it kind of almost was over mine, but I never knew what UDP was when I heard that, and now that makes total sense, because it's more like you're listening to the radio. If you hear, well, obviously the radio is too dumb a technology to ever go back and resend you corrupted packets that were not sent through correctly, but like you would just hear that as analog interruption. Like you hear the static when you turn a radio on. Like that's UDP. It's not giving you. It's not like a smart protocol to actually error check or course correct or anything like that.
Yeah, and a lot of the time UDP, at least in my like experience working in the field, UDP, most of the time that it came up for me was just to send a file directly between two machines, that are on a LAN, and so there's like virtually no chance of anything dropping, because it's just a peer-to-peer layer 2 connection, yeah, so a lot of, and it'll be like a 2 kilobyte file, or something.
Yeah.
Like, oh, your phone needs to download its settings file from the phone server. Boom, it's just like a real quick UDP.
And the reason I kind of wanted to go into this was because if you were to even, cut away all of that knowledge that we just got and assumed that it, comparatively, a Netflix show versus streaming a game presents a lot of problems in games that were never designed to be experienced that way. Like I'm thinking, like, okay, if I were to have a hard drive in a NAS enclosure in my house, and I set it up so that if I could somehow mod my PlayStation 2 to actually seek, instead of going to the disk for data in my memory card, well, it'd still use the memory card. It would use the line to read the disk to rather access a file over the network and actually access the ROM file on a hard drive I have stored. If I could do that, then what would happen is in my home network, it would probably be plenty fast, just enough to where there would never be an issue, unless there were any kind of data corruption sent along the way, which that's very unlikely in a home network. If I wanted to do that same thing to place Sony servers, maybe they have a server farm in my state I don't even know if they have one in the country. I'm sure they do. But either way, I'm going way further. My PlayStation 2 is pointing way further away than my house to then seek that data. And obviously this is just, I'm saying PS2 because it plays a PS1 game. I'm just trying to say, if I were to try and stream that video game over a much farther distance, what's going to happen when we need to load? What's going to happen when there's network desync? What's going to happen when there's... there's so many things that can go wrong from a programming standpoint that the people who made games like Final Fantasy VII or Legend of Dragoon never had to go, oh, hey, what if the controller gets unplugged for a millisecond every other second for a minute every 5 minutes? Like, what happens when nobody QAs for that? It's like there's so many scenarios that could go wrong that could corrupt your data from trying to stream a game in general. So that's kind of where I'm at when I was thinking, how the fuck do you stream a video game? Because there's just so many things more seeking, like data seeking and writing and reading than are involved than just streaming a TV show, which is essentially just a video file. It's one file you play.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right to have that question, because theoretically, if you're talking about a game that just has loading screens and it just has the loading screen, but not during a loading screen, it doesn't have to load, right? You could imagine that would be fine and it would work that way in the way that we're talking about, where instead of reading from the disk, it reads from the network during a loading screen, right? But that's not actually how games work. Games are loading all the time.
Yeah, it would be even worse for an open world game because you're always pulling data in.
I was just going to say, flying around the high wind in FF7, the game is loading those regions as you're going all the time. And so, hey, check this out. In FF7, take your high wind and hold square. When you hold square and it lets you strafe around.
Yeah.
If you go diagonally backwards, you can see big square voids, chunks of the world not loaded in.
Oh,
and you can see them load in because of this field of view that the game loads the regions at a time.
Yeah.
If you drive in diagonally backwards, you'll be able to see things that aren't loaded.
I'm picturing a diagonal, obviously 90 degrees by 90 degrees jagged line of a horizon of just pretty sunlight, and then just black that hasn't become sunlight yet.
It's more like there's a big black square hole in the ground.
Oh yeah. So you're seeing below the skybox without actually being below the skybox, because it hasn't loaded yet, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay, but anyway, what I was ultimately getting at though is that what that means is so that's how they don't stream. That's how you don't stream games. Game streaming doesn't work that way. So maybe it took us too long to get here, and so if you've been yelling at your monitor for a half hour, sorry. Look, we know that's not how game streaming works. It either works in one way, which is how we talked about with the PS3, where the game is essentially running on a server somewhere else, and it is just streaming the video output to you, and you are streaming your controller inputs to it, right? But all of the processing and loading and all that is happening on the server, right? And you're just getting the video from it.
That is a whole another step forward, in terms of initial investment of technology, though. In Netflix you'd be streaming a video from a file from a server. In this, you're kind of just you're getting a lot more. A lot more.
So that's how they handle PS3, I know. But yeah, I think for the PS1 and PS4 games and stuff, I imagine you just download the game and play it, I think, but I'm not actually positive. I haven't read through the whole thing here, but I mean, it would solve so many problems to just download the file, and then every time you try to boot it, it probably has to connect to the internet and make sure that you're still allowed to play it, which hurts me to say because I hate that shit, but that's probably how it works.
My point was I guess my point doesn't mean a whole lot now that I'm thinking about it, because it's my concern is because of how much more investment there being, because you have to all right, so like I said before, streaming a video file, you just have to access a video file. Streaming a video game like you're talking about, kind of how like the Nvidia Shield works, I want to say, or whatever. Nvidia has some service where they have to essentially build server farms of like gaming PCs. And so they not only do they have the data on their end, but now they're also doing all the computational power and just sending you as little latency feedback video feed as they can. So it's like I was thinking, well, that's just going to mean it's a much bigger incentive to cancel the service the second the expected revenue goes south. And then I was like, oh, wait, well, it's a rental service to begin with. It's not like I was trying to, buy a digital game and then hope to own it forever.
Yeah. Yeah, now that you mention that actually was a service that was a thing for a while where you could rent GPU power essentially. Like there was a thing where it's like, "Hey, do you want to play high-end PC gaming on your piece of shit PC?" Well, there was a service where you paid a certain monthly amount and it was it was exactly what you're describing where the game would run or at least the GPU, the game would run on another machine somewhere else and you would just get the video streamed to you.
Yep.
I heard, I never tried it myself, but I heard very mixed results, which is what you would expect to hear because people have very mixed qualities of internet signals.
And I know this is probably the worst game to give as an example, but it was the only way my buddy at the time could play Valheim with us, which sounds really pathetic because Valheim is a game that probably should be running on an iPad with no issues, but like there was something about I think he just didn't have a video card in his computer at the time, so he was just kind of stuck using an office PC, and then just he said it didn't really give him any trouble, but of course he's like I don't know if he's kind of the type of person that would be hypersensitive to input latency and that sort of thing. Like that's kind of one of those things that you got to be a pro gamer to understand. You have to have a certain level of sweat to you, to your stench, I guess.
I mean, in the defense of needing something like that for Valheim, though, I mean that game is still in early access and it was not super well optimized when they first released it. Well, there was weird stuff to it, like if you did too much terraforming, it would just make it so that the game your frame rate would just like go down and down and down the more that you terraformed.
Did they fix that?
Yeah, they've been working on stuff like that.
Nice.
I don't know if it's like I don't know if I would call it fixed, quote unquote, because I'm not sure, but they have at least worked on it and improved it for sure.
Gotcha.
But yeah. Well, anyway, that's there. Wow, that that was topic number 1 for today. I mean, that's kind of the retro gaming news that's been around is this PlayStation thing.
Yeah.
Oh, the final positive note I wanted to end on with it is that they did say that at least some of them you're gonna be able to buy these games. You don't have to stream them, right? Or by stream them, I mean you don't have to be continually paying the subscription service to access these games. They will also be purchasable, which is a step above what Nintendo is doing, where you can't buy the Nintendo ROMs like you used to be able to, Remember how great the Virtual Console was? Remember when the Wii came out and Nintendo fucking revolutionized modern retro gaming with the Wii and you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and the Wii ruled. I loved it.
And they made the Virtual Console, and it was like, holy shit, here's all these NES games for $5 a piece.
I didn't actually explore the Virtual Console too much, but I do own all 3 Suikoden games because of that.
Now, I realized that...
Oh, wait, no, that was PS3. I'm sorry.
Their model by today's standard is super antiquated because like $5 a piece sounds kind of like a lot, particularly for some of the games. And also they were bound to your console. So like if you still have your same Nintendo account today, you don't get to download those games on the Switch, which is kind of bullshit, right? But I just want to say for the time in 2007, right? When the Wii came out, this was revolutionary. This completely changed the market as far as retro gaming, modern. The virtual console was a huge deal. And yeah, it's a bit on Nintendo's side, it's a bit of a shame that I think that they've gone downhill from there.
Yeah.
Where the Wii U still had virtual console, great. They had virtual console on the 3DS, great. Now on the Switch they got rid of it, and that fucking sucks that they got rid of it. Yeah, they've got the streaming service, but we would very much like to just buy games and play them, and so it's a good thing that Sony's doing that at least.
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking about it. I was like, yeah, it's hard to relate for me, because when I got my Wii and I was looking at the virtual console, I was like, why would I pay these prices for that when I could just play these games elsewhere? And then, God, it went on when I was like, well, if I want to play them digitally, I have a console right here okay, I didn't already have all my old retro consoles. I had to buy those. But if I wanted to play them, it felt like a ripoff in general to buy them digitally to me. So I never really got too deep in that. And then now I was like, it's hard for me to relate, but that might have been why it's hard for me to relate. Because you look at the price of like DS games, like the actual cartridges themselves. My God, dude, like a Pokemon game on DS now is over $100. It's insane. So it's like, I'm going to miss out, because all the games, good on Nintendo again at making the packaging super throwawayable for a lot of people, because they just make little cartridges that fit into their accessories that they sell with their cases that, throw away all your cases. You can fit all your tiny little cartridges in here. It's like, wow, that has made all those games inaccessible physically from a price or availability standpoint. And now it's digitally hard to get them to play them. So it's like, I don't even know what's going on throughout the entire half of the DS lineup, most of the 3DS lineup, and honestly, a lot of the Switch too. There's so much Nintendo I've not experienced just because it has been more difficult than just playing PC games or playing PS4 games.
Yeah,
it's harder. It's sad and it's unrelatable.
Well, a big plus on the virtual console back then, even if you already had a lot of the games to play, was that there was some stuff that had never been available before. Like Earthbound Origins was Mother 1, and that release, that was the first official English Nintendo release of Mother 1 in the US.
It's also Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth, where they redid the first Game Boy game for Castlevania.
Now, was that WiiWare though, or was that that was a Wii game?
Pretty sure it's WiiWare, yeah.
Not like a
Is it
Wii
not the same
virtual console game. Well, I mean, it's a little semantic of me or pedantic of me.
Didn't you have to buy it on the Wii Virtual Console?
Well, not the Virtual Console if it's a WiiWare game.
God damn it.
Okay. So if you just made a Wii game, right? You just made a Wii game and it's available digitally. That's WiiWare.
That's true.
But if it's it's on one of the emulators, they had like the NES and the SNES and the Genesis games that basically ran on an emulator that was the Wii. That's the virtual console.
When I was a boy, we got a cartridge and plugged the shit in. And that's all there was to it.
Yeah, but you had to get different cartridges for different decks, and each one of those decks had a different handle.
Whoa, what are we talking about?
I'm trying to use old man terms. Oh man, when I was working at
remote control.
Yeah, when I was working at GameStop, oh man, people had funny names for things. Deck, actually, if you look at a Super Nintendo console,
oh yeah, they do say control deck.
It says control deck, yeah. But for the console itself, yeah.
It also calls Game Boy games game packs.
Oh yeah, without a C.
Without a C. PAK. And boy, that stuck.
But yeah, people had funny names for controllers though. The funniest one I feel like the funniest one was paddle. Like, someone like a man coming in looking for an Xbox 360 controller, but he's asking me for a paddle. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? But it's like it's a little more understandable when you think like, okay, maybe this guy had like a Magnavox Odyssey when he was younger or something, you know. But then handle was actually really common. People would ask for, yeah, like, you guys got extra handles for it. That was super common.
What the fuck is no? What is this, like a northern thing? Is this like how you guys say pop?
I mean, maybe.
That's so weird.
I've never called it a handle. It was just something that some people said, and I heard it, you know.
The most obscure thing I get is remote control, and at least that still kind of makes sense.
Well, yeah, so remotes was funny until the Wii came out, and then the controller actually was a remote, and so, yeah. Speaking of remotes, though, I mean, for regional stuff, did people around you call remotes clickers?
Yes, clickers is still a thing, but I don't think anyone in my immediate or extended family ever said clicker. It was always just the remote control.
It's an old person thing, I think.
It is. I think it's, yeah. But it's like, I don't think even all the old people I know have ever said clicker.
Yeah. But anyway, oh god, we went off there again.
I think we were pretty much all off those subjects and all done on there. And I think you wanted to talk about a little game called Alundra.
Yeah, steer us back on course, Captain. I've been playing a game for the PlayStation 1. It's called Alundra. It was produced by Working Designs. I think it was developed by a company named like Matrix Software or something, but their name actually isn't on the box, I don't think. But when you boot up the game, it says Working Designs, which is the company that localized it.
Yeah.
In association with Matrix Software or something like that.
The developer is Matrix Software. Yep.
There you go. So there's so that's the game and who made it. Let me tell you, first thing looking at this game is like, I was really impressed just by the box. So you know how some games on PS1 are just your regular jewel cases, but then you got the double deckers, you know, for the games that have multiple discs. This game, in the same vein as like Brave Fencer Musashi or Persona 2 or Persona 1, it's a single disc game, but fuck you, it's in a double decker anyway.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, so usually they do that when they include a thick boy manual or promotional materials and like stickers and stuff.
Oh,
like
yeah. That's where we're going with this.
Nice.
So it's a double decker box, right? And it's got this nice, like, Alundra is written on the front in like this nice foiling, you know, and you're like, ooh, it looks kind of cool, right? And then you flip it over on the back and it's got a bunch of screenshots, you know, around the borders, like the ads, like the banner ads in Idiocracy, you know, all around the edges are screenshots. And then in the middle, there's a blurb of like what the game is about, but the lettering, it's like gold foil lettering, you know? So it's like the screenshots look normal, but like the print of this cover art is like, it's got this shiny gold lettering, and it's like, whoa, this is like a premium product, it looks like, you know? You open it up and yeah, the manual is like a half a centimeter thick. Like, it is a thick ass full color manual. It's got tons of artwork.
I'm going to stop you right there. What the fuck is a centimeter? Half a centimeter?
It's about quarter inch. About quarter inch.
I hate that I actually am a big metric person, and when you said quarter inch, I knew better what you meant.
Super thick manual, full color. It you know, it's got full pages that are just artwork, you know, so it looks really nice. And a big reason that I'm going into all this is because something really, really unique that I've never seen before on a game caught my eye, which is that the last page of the manual had the translation notes.
Ooh.
And it was it was just like a full page of text written by Working Designs, just talking about how cool they think the game is, why they decided to localize it and bring it to the US, and they even go into the slight gameplay changes that they made. They say like, we made a couple balance changes like this and this. Yeah, and it's like, whoa, like, especially for a game that came out for PS1, to have this kind of like very human, like just just note about how much they like the game and how cool they think it is, and hope you have a great time, and it's like, wow, what a neat thing.
Love that.
So anyway,
quick little blurb here for those who don't know about Working Designs. Working Designs, from my understanding, I think it's a Canadian company, and they are super small. Like they were a super small team. I don't even know if they're still around, but for a while they did a lot of localizations of specifically Japanese games that like the big big publishers here probably wouldn't put their hands on because they didn't think it'd be a worthwhile investment. And fair enough. These games are niche kind of market games, and from what I understand, pretty much everything by Working Designs has a high degree of kind of what you're talking about, where there's just a lot of quality, a lot of like humanness talking to you about how they localize things, how they translate things, the little notes about like, okay, over there, this wouldn't translate exactly well this way, so we put it this way. And even you talking about how like they must have like a patch note system. That's pretty cool. But yeah, they're known for making these really low like print but very very high quality like games. They're known for making them accessible to Western audiences. And if you haven't already, as the last thing I'll say about them, if you haven't already, My Life in Gaming, fantastic YouTube channel, they actually did a special on Working Designs. Highly recommend you checking that out.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, one more thing to say about the packaging is that from what I understand, this game actually has like 8 different variations of its packaging as well, where everything that I've already mentioned is the same, but the disc itself, as well as the artwork that's behind the disc in the cover or in the case, apparently there's like 8 different variations of it. If you bought the game, you might have one of 8 different discs, like the artwork that's on it and behind it. So that's kind of cool as well. The one I got has like the big stone golem face on the cover.
Yeah, you said
on the back as well as the disc.
You said 8 different discs, and I immediately went, "Oh God, this has to be one of the most expensive games." If you're like for people to try and collect all of them.
Yeah, right. And so that's one of those things that's actually kind of interesting how you might take it, because it's like, on one hand, that's really neat and unique and awesome. But if you are someone who like you're a very completionist collector, that's a fucking nightmare. Because now the game's 8 times as expensive.
So just for reference, the complete in box price for Alundra right now on PlayStation 1 is sitting at around $158.
That's actually not very much more than what I paid for it like several years ago.
The disc alone is $70.
Okay, yeah. I bought this game like 6 years ago on Camel's recommendation. And I finally got around to playing it. But okay, so let's talk about the actual game. So you pop this fucker in your system, right? And it is, first of all, this is a 2D sprite-based game on PlayStation, right? Love it. Yeah. And, with like the color palette and all of the graphical effects that the PlayStation 2 or the PlayStation 1 is capable of, sprite work, holy shit, it looks good. Like all of the artwork or like all the characters look awesome, all the environments look awesome, all of the enemies look awesome, just amazing looking game. Even like the text boxes are like a paper scroll, and the typeface that they use, like the pixelated letters that they use, just look really cool. Like it's a very unique typeface, and yeah, it gets you into it right away. And so what kind of game this is the very first thing that everyone says or would say when they see it, when they first get into it, is, wow, this is a lot like Zelda. It is a top-down game where you control a character, who walks around. It's a 2D sprites, top-down view. That angled top-down view, right? So you see the fronts of buildings and the tops of buildings, right? But you don't see the sides of them. It's not isometric, right? Like think like Pokemon.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's your perspective. You've got a sword to slash dudes like it's Zelda, and then as you play through the game, you start out, there's a bunch of shit that you can't interact with at first, and as you play the game, you start to get, you find different dungeons. The different dungeons have items in them, such as bombs, bow and arrow, that kind of thing. And that allows you to interact with more things in the world, which allows you to get to new places, like new dungeons that have new items in them. Wow, this sounds exactly like Zelda, doesn't it? However, there's a few things that really, really differentiate it from Zelda. The first of which, the biggest thing of which for me, being the themes and story of the game are a lot more serious. Like this game's the way that the story is presented feels a lot more JRPG-ish, just where there's a lot more like cutscene. In Zelda, you don't really old Zeldas, you don't really often see like cutscenes where characters are like actors on screen kind of walking around, text boxes coming up, acting things out. That doesn't really happen in Zelda. Usually you just talk to people and they got a one text box and then you're done, right? But this is much more JRPG-ish, where you've got like cutscenes, right, where the characters are entering the frame and then they interact with each other. There's lots of dialogue. They've got character portraits and that kind of stuff. And the story is a lot darker. Like the translation, it's actually kind of weird, and it's one slight point of criticism maybe for the game is that well, at first it doesn't sound bad. That the translation is very silly and jokey. Like the tone of the game normally is very wacky. The way that characters talk, there's a lot of jokes. And not even necessarily jokes, but just characters saying things in weird ways. I wish I could think of even one example of
Just
what I'm
saying things
talking about.
that would like
It'll
make
be
a
like,
social interaction awkward.
yeah, it'll be like a character. It talks about having a meal, right? But the way that they say it'll be like, I'm about ready to chow down on some serious grub time. You know what I
God damn
mean?
it.
And it's like, what? Like, why is it written like this?
No.
A lot of the translation is like that, where you're like, but it's still like a lot of it isn't that cringy and it's just fine, but every once in a while it's like that and you're like, why did they write it like that? But the story, like the plot heavy parts of the game though, are like really serious, where the game dives into some very dark themes.
So there's some pretty big tonal shifts, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Big tonal shifts, which is normally fine, right? Like, I'm normally a big fan of that in games. Every once in a while, though, they place a joke in like a really inappropriate time, and it really takes you out of it. Like, for example, light little spoilers as possible, but like there's a point where like a character transforms into a werewolf and then murders his wife, right? And
Classic
it's like,
joke.
whoa, super dark. What's happening here? But then a character like makes a joke about domestic violence. They're like, oh, that's some form of domestic violence, huh? Right? And it's like, this is not the time. Like, this is a very serious thing that's happening here. So yeah, there every once in a while shit like that happens and you're just like, I don't know about this translation. But for the most part it's good.
It's a fever dream.
But anyway, point is it's very different from Zelda in that sense. The way that the cutscenes are presented to you, as well as the story that's being told, it's a lot more like an RPG, with like kind of the story that it gets into also about it being about like, oh, there's, you know, gods, and the gods are only as powerful as the people make them with their faith. But lately, the people's faith has been lessened, and so the gods are getting weak and angry, and so they are like the gods are trying to cause problems for the humans, so that the humans are scared and start praying again because they're afraid, right? And that'll juice them up again, you know? Like that's like very broadly like kind of what's happening in the plot, you know?
Is it just kind of one of those generic the world is becoming less spiritual and like I feel the life force dying kind of JRPG things going on?
I mean, so that's one element of it, but that's only one element of it.
Okay, were there 6 crystals that you have to gather after they're scattered?
Well, they call them crests.
Okay.
And but yes, actually, you do have to gather some things in order to access, you know, the palace that holds the god, you know, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's got a lot of that going on. But the gameplay is much more right Zelda-ish, but let's talk about the other differences, because you use Zelda as a base, and then let's talk about how it is different from that. Another thing is that you can jump in this game, which makes it a lot different from, you know, Link to the Past or something. You can jump, and you have just the ability to jump. This is a big deal. It's not like Link's Awakening jumping either, right? Link's Awakening jumping is just to get over holes.
Oh.
This game has platforming in it. You know what I mean? Where, like, you know, there are moving platforms, there are gaps, you got to jump across them, you got to time things.
Hang on, is combat turn-based?
No, it's like Zelda. You just hit
stuff. Literally just like this sword swing out in front of you. Okay, gotcha. So I'm thinking, okay, so when you said there's jumping, I was immediately like, whoa, hang on, why? Because when I was thinking about it graphically, I'm thinking like Pokemon again, and I think about how like in the cave systems in Pokemon, like think Mountain Moon, being able to jump like from one platform to another is game breaking. You would just jump to the next level and then take a ladder and leave. So it's like, right. How do they do it in this game?
There's actually a lot to talk about with the jumping, because it's a huge part of how this game feels to play. So think Pokemon as far as the perspective goes, but not the like tile-based movement. Your movement in this game is smooth. So you can move in 8 directions, you know, with your D-pad, and it's all very, you know, you can move 1 pixel at a time, right? It's all very smooth. And yeah, so there's, you know, and your character can just jump. So, you know, if a platform is only this much higher, you can jump onto it, right? Or like, you know, and if a gap is this wide, you can jump across it. You can change directions midair, so sometimes there'll be like a platform here and a platform here and like a wall between them with the gap. It's hard to explain, but I'm talking about like jumping around a corner, you know, you can do stuff like that. And yeah, there's a lot of like moving platforms puzzles, and a lot of the puzzles have to do with things like I got to get this barrel over here so I can throw it onto the ground, and then I can jump off the barrel to get onto a higher thing, and that kind of thing, right? It's all very free, which is a bit of a double-edged sword. The thing is, a lot of games restrict your movement a lot more than this, in a way that makes the puzzles a lot more easy to figure out and generally feel a little easier to execute, you know? Like, and I kind of think of that as I kind of think of one of those things as good and one as bad. What I mean is, like, if you think about the jumping in Ocarina of Time or something, or well, if you think about Link to the Past, in Link to the Past, you cannot jump the way that you interact.
I didn't even know you could jump in Link to the Past. Oh, I'm sorry, not Link to the Past. I'm thinking Link's Awakening. Damn it, no, yeah. I'm thinking, damn it, what's the cute Game Boy one?
Link's Awakening.
That's Link with, okay, I didn't even know you could jump in that.
Well, there's an item that jumps you.
Okay,
but yeah.
Gotcha.
So if you like, okay, so let's take, like Link's Awakening or something, for example. I mean, there's a game where your movement is much more restricted, because when you see like because the levels are much more of a flat plane with just holes in them. And you can jump over a hole that's 1 grid tile wide, and other than that, your movement is restricted to this flat plane. You know what I'm describing here?
A flat plane.
Your movement is restricted to this flat ground.
You don't have any way to get to a higher level or lower, I guess, is what you're saying.
Yes, unless it's specifically provided to you by something like a staircase or something like that, right? There are very specific elements in place to move you between levels or that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But Alundra is more open in that, like, well, no, your character can just jump, and this is how high he jumps, and this is how far he jumps, and the levels are constructed much more complex. So you actually have like a staircase of platforms that you might just have to jump up, you know? But this is all from that top-down perspective. But like, you know, you're just jumping around on moving platforms, jumping up things, and then you can get over the top, and then you can just fall down into this next spot, grab a barrel, throw the barrel up onto a ledge, and then jump up something else to get up there, and then pick the barrel back up, throw it somewhere else, jump on top of the barrel, that gets you on top of something else. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Very like directional 4-way. Well, you said 8-way directional, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, it's much more complex.
The graphics kind of look like I'm looking at it now, and I guess it's an easy way to describe it by saying it's very much like a little bit less perspective given to Octopath Traveler or Triangle Strategy, those kind of games where like there's still 3D forms in the level, but it's like definitely all viewed from a 2D top-down perspective. I see what you mean.
Yeah, but those games are usually isometric though, and this one isn't, right? This one is like straight on.
Yeah, it's like not at a diagonal curve at all. There's no perspective lines going somewhere else. Yeah.
So what I'm ultimately getting at with the movement is that because it's so much less rigid, that makes the solving of puzzles a lot more freeform than something like Zelda. And so a lot of the time, the puzzles are a lot more difficult to figure out how to get through a room, because it's not like you see the elements like staircase here, block here, hole here. I get it, you know. Instead, it's all it's the environment is much more complex, and your movement is much more complex, and you have to really like be a little bit more creative and intuitive in order to like figure out how the hell am I going to get up onto this ledge, you know? And then you kind of look around and fight some dudes, and at some point you'll kind of realize like what parts you can interact with and what things you can how to move around, and eventually you'll figure it out. Now,
but it's Zelda on steroids is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah. Now so it's a bit more difficult to execute.
Did you ever play the Legacy of Goku for Game Boy Advance? That Dragon Ball Z game? It was basically, if you took, imagine Game Boy Zelda, or really NES Zelda, I guess, and made it a little bit faster, and open world is not the right way to say it, but there are big maps that you'd walk around. Like, you wouldn't be able to see, like, it's not a square by square thing. Like, there's not like a maze every square. It's like I'm in a big open area. I'm going to walk up here. Now the world scrolls up. Kind of like how I think Link's Awakening works without all the cells, I guess. And so you'd have like your attack, and you'd have like a projectile attack too. Like, you could use your punch right in front of you, or you could just shoot a fireball. And it was funny because it's like the most rudimentary form of fighting from what you can kind of translate from the anime show. It was like the funniest, most basic form of fighting Frieza ever. And it turns out the entire difficulty of the game is really just in how mobile the enemy is. Like, you're just like walking around like Ash in Pokemon, right? You don't even have a bicycle to go faster. But halfway through the fight, if you can outmaneuver him and outbeat him, like, you know, it goes to the whole Super Saiyan transition for the first time ever, and like you have these superpowers. It was a fun game, but it's a high action game, kind of from that top down perspective. That, you know, it seems like you have a little bit more JRPG-ness to it than this one, but like it was fun to see that format and that perspective get used in an action game.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Zelda, like Link's Awakening, has a lot of action in it too, just the fighting and stuff. I would definitely consider like the boss battles and
I need to play it. I can't wait to.
Link's Awakening?
I haven't played a single Zelda game ever.
I thought you were a Game Boy guy. You've never played Link's Awakening?
I never had a Zelda game for Game Boy. My parents bought me Super Mario Land. Love it.
Okay, that's a good start.
That was the first ever video game I think I played. They bought me Metroid 2, The Return of Samus. Loved it, but it was too hard for me to figure out as a kid. Honestly, still kind of too hard for me to figure out. And then the rest of it was, they had a game called Race Days, because, you know, I'm from the South and my dad loved NASCAR and shit. So he gave me this hybrid 2-in-1 game cartridge, which I want to say the first game is RC Pro-Am on NES. Not NES, Game Boy, but it's like the same. You know how, like, when a game came out back then, it came out for Game Gear, Game Boy, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and they were all completely different games. And one of them just be absolutely shitty. Yeah, this is like during that era. So like I had the RC Pro-Am, but it was a 2-in-1 cartridge with this, I want to say it was called Dirty Drivin', and it was this first-person perspective behind the steering wheel view of a Jeep Wrangler. Or you look at the cover and it didn't have the vertical slats like Jeep have. It had like a horizontal line, and it had like square headlights, and, you know, just enough to not legally be a Jeep Wrangler while still completely being a Jeep Wrangler. It was one of those things. It was like my God, man, first-person racing game in cockpit view on the Game Boy. And I kid you not, it was a slideshow. Turning, driving, seeing another Jeep in front of you. It was like one step above a Tiger Electronics game, where it could literally just show you so many kinds of different pictures in that frame before it like moves where the ink actually appears on the screen. I had that, and I think the last one I had was later on, which was Super Mario Land 2, 6 Golden Coins, which probably that was my favorite Mario game until I played Sunshine on the GameCube.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you got some good Game Boy games in there.
No Zelda though.
You should play Link's Awakening though.
I have it now, and I'm going to once I start Zelda.
Excellent. Well, back to Alundra. There's one more very, very, very important topic to discuss about it, which is probably the most important thing. I don't know why I saved it for last.
Combat?
Which is the puzzles.
Oh.
The big thing about this game, and actually the reason that the game was recommended to me in the first place, I think, and the thing that like I heard about it that made me want to play it and all that, is that the puzzles are much, much more difficult than your average Zelda puzzle. You know, since that's the big point of comparison, right? Is Zelda.
How hard is a Zelda puzzle?
You know, a lot of the time, so it depends on the era of Zelda, right? Because Zelda 1 didn't really have puzzles in it, quote unquote, you know, rather it just had secrets in it. Sort of, you know what I mean? The puzzle in Zelda 1 is like, oh, this block is pushable, and that opens the door. Okay, gotcha. Right. It wasn't until Link's Awakening, really, that the puzzles started to be like, okay, here's a room full of pushable blocks. You got to figure out how to push them to get through it, right? That wasn't until later. And there were a few things in like Link's Awakening or Link to the Past that were kind of tough. There were some things in Zelda 2 that were really tough, but again, they bordered more on the idea of like a secret rather than a puzzle per se.
Yeah, because Zelda 2, they tried to do the Castlevania thing and make an adventure game out of it, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and Zelda 1 is an adventure game also,
Well,
but
yeah, but it's like totally different perspective. They made it like a
yeah.
side-scrolling thing.
Yeah, it was right. It had a lot in common with Castlevania 2 for sure. And yeah, like some of the things in Zelda 2 were super hard, but more in like a NES secret way.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to like
Link's
when you get
Awakening.
to like Ocarina of Time,
Oh,
and well, some stuff in Majora's Mask is kind of tough also, but basically, I would say after N64, right? Once you get into like Twilight Princess and stuff, I feel like Zelda puzzles are extremely easy.
okay.
Like they're like I tried to replay Twilight Princess recently, and it was like I wasn't even playing a video game. It was like it was so
that was the Wii one, right?
it came out on GameCube and Wii simultaneously.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But
Um,
that was like the more adult-ish kind of teen Link, right? Like that was not the cartoon little kid Link.
Yeah, and man, it really felt like just going through the motions, right? Like, oh, I get it. Yeah, you got to do this. Okay, I get it. Yeah, pull the lever. That moved that thing. Now I go over there and interact with that. Okay, that moved that thing. Okay, go over there. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
oh, they weren't puzzles. And I guess a lot of I, the funny thing about it is like when you define puzzle that way, like a lot of stuff in Twilight Princess is or is Zelda in general, a lot of the time rather than like logic puzzles, it's a lot of just like figuring out how to navigate through the dungeon overall,
Essentially, you're playing Doom, and instead of needing a yellow, a blue, and a red key card, you just need the red key card. Right?
Right, but you need multiple of them because they're
Okay.
one-time use.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, but
consumable.
right. So it's like I got to go into this room and do the thing that gets me the key, and then
I just noticed you're wearing a Doom hoodie or a shirt anyway.
Oh yeah, oh look at that. Maybe it was subliminal.
Could have been.
But
we're also in a Doom level too here on the
Oh,
video
yeah.
podcast.
So to talk about Alundra, though, I mean, this is a game that actually has shit where it's like, I'm gonna get my notes out here so I can give you a specific example, right? Well, first of all, so yeah, this is a game where like I wrote down notes
You need
as
notes,
I took it.
yeah.
And it was like I talked to one guy and he said, Brown respects my teaching more than required. And then I talked to another guy and he says, and he oh, that was Green, by the way. Then I talked to Blue and he says, I never listen to the teachings of Green. And then I talked to White and he says, my teaching surpasses all others' teachings. And then I talked to Red and he says, my teaching is not as great as Blue. And then I talked to Brown, and it's Red's teaching is the foundation of Green's. And then the game's like, okay, order them. What order are they in?
Hang on. That's not an order, though. That's not an order.
But when you write them all down and you consider the logic of each one and how it applies to them, yeah, it is an order.
Well, okay, yes, but I was thinking more along the lines of I could have just cherry-picked, like, either red or brown. I didn't pay attention to every trait of every quality, but it sounded like one of those could have just immediately just discounted the rest of the colors based off of the sentence that you gave with it. Like, this is the basis of this thing's teachings. But, okay, what if White's teachings is mine surpass all others? Well, then the logic flow is the surpasses all others. It doesn't matter what the other colors are. So it's not really an order of things. Why would you order them if the others logically don't even apply?
See, now you're getting into it.
Yeah, it's a good puzzle. This
is what I'm talking about. So yeah, you get into it, and like this is the kind of puzzle that's in this game,
It's fun. It's just weird to call that. Anyway, I'm getting hung up on semantics. That's what I do.
It's great. So some puzzles are like that. Some puzzles are like, how are you going to get through the room? Which involves like throwing barrels around in order to be able to climb. Some puzzles are, like, how are you going to push the blocks? Right. It's got all the different kinds of puzzles, but but like more so than anything that I've seen in Zelda, like some of these puzzles are fuckers, you know, like well,
you're taking notes on this. You're not also like mapping things out, right? Are you?
There was one dungeon I had to draw a map for.
Wow. Okay.
It was very complicated.
Damn.
So yeah, awesome. Like, so I guess we'll talk about like opinions, right? Oh, the game also has boss battles that are pretty cool. You know, as well as like it does also have that overall Zelda style of like what I talked about, where the puzzle, quote unquote, of getting through a dungeon is more about like figuring out how to navigate through the dungeon room by room. Like if I do something in this room, that unlocks something in this room, that unlocks a shortcut back to this room, and you know, eventually you find out the whole flow. That's part of it as well. It's just that a lot of the piecemeal puzzles are a lot more difficult themselves.
I'm also seeing what you were talking about before with like the rough, tattered paper scrolls as the text box aesthetic. And there's even like, so you know how in JRPG you'd have the text box for the dialogue, but you'd also have the name of the person saying it. That's like a smaller on top separate scroll. So there's like two scrolls like taking up literally a third of your entire screen, but it doesn't matter because your character sprite is maybe just like an inch worth of your TV's real estate. So yeah, because when I was thinking about the first thing I don't mean to interrupt you too much here, but the first thing I thought about was Grandia, when you talked about 2D sprites, RPG-ish kind of thing on PS1. But then Grandia's got that that's got that isometric view that I loved a whole lot, because I never found that in previous technology game consoles. You know, I couldn't really do that, where they have like a lot of 3D models and like the isometric view, but you still have a 2D sprite. And the sprite rotates with the perspective and all that. So that's what I was thinking of at first. But yeah, it seems like it's totally different, because that's also a different kind of combat system too. That's like a JRPG combat system, where this is just straight up action.
Yeah. So yeah, overall, you know, I can't stress enough how good this game looks. You know, graphically, it's just absolutely gorgeous. The individual sprites themselves, as well as like the animations and stuff, just everything in the game looks gorgeous. Alundra is a game for you if you like challenging puzzles, pretty challenging combat, especially a couple of the boss battles were really tough. So yeah, it's very Zelda-like, but it's like Zelda, but with a lot more like meat, of, I guess is what I would say.
Content.
You know, harder puzzles, harder combat, darker, you know, more serious story. Like I hesitate to say this, look, it's what's coming to my head is that it's like Zelda, but more for adults, is like kind of what I want to say. But I don't mean to say that adults can't enjoy Zelda. I love most Zelda games. I really, really like. Don't get me wrong. They're super enjoyable. It's a super enjoyable series. But Alundra felt like it was like Zelda, but with like, it was like more more substance. It kind of felt like. But as far as criticisms go, though, I mean, it does have some criticisms, like that freedom of movement that I was talking about does come with a decent amount of kind of jankiness.
You get stuck on shit all the time.
Yeah, like the game feels like a little jankier. And the thing is, though, like for the purpose of giving you that freedom of movement, I appreciate that. But yeah, sometimes it's a little weird. And also the perspective, you know, I kind of wished that the game was isometric a lot when I was playing it, because the perspective can be kind of confusing sometimes.
I'm looking at this. There's this place called Nava's Cabin. It's like, I guess this is a pieced together overworld view map of the area, kind of like what you would see printed in maybe like a strategy guide. But it's like it looks like something you wouldn't be able to actually see in game unless the game specifically zoomed way out, and it looks like it would be a little bit much of a bitch to navigate, because there's like 3 different levels, maybe even 4 different levels to this one pier on this beachy area. Like there's like a pier and like a cabin at the end of the pier, and then there's different levels and decks to this one area with another cabin on a separate level. So it's like with the isometric view, you get the benefit of seeing staircases go down rather than seeing a big square with like weird light shading to it. So I feel like it'd be a lot easier to navigate in that sense. So, but you know, it's like at the same on the other token, it looks like Pokemon HD in a way that like they never went in the direction of, because you know with the 3DS and all, they went more kind of like, let's go with 3D models, let's make these areas feel like they have that perspective, but really things are going to be these big geometric forms and wide like planes that you have to traverse, but nothing complicated like this.
Yeah, the top-down perspective, it gets confusing a lot. Like there's definitely times where you try to jump across a gap onto a platform and you fall because it turns out that platform is actually further back and higher up.
Yeah.
And so but from your perspective, it looks like they're side by side.
Oh
right?
God, yeah. Thinking about that, it's like trying to play. Okay, did you ever see those like weird perspective shifts of like Mario? Like trying to play Mario from Mario's perspective would be so goddamn difficult to judge distance and how hard you need to jump, because there's just a whole like, it's almost like shifting the well, obviously you're shifting the point of perspective, but like it's almost like you are cutting out 45 degrees of information by looking ahead and not getting the x-axis for the y-axis information you're visually seeing.
Yeah, so it can make jumps like that really weird, especially when you're trying to jump between moving platforms and it turns out that one of them is like a level above the other one. So like you have to offset it. It can be really weird. And sometimes you look at a structure and like you're talking about with the cabin. Every once in a while you look at something in this game and you're just like, what the fuck am I looking at? Like I don't even know what this is. So yeah, the graphics can be a little ambiguous at times. And
I like them though.
But everything is drawn incredibly well and it looks really good.
There's not a lot of color. Like most of the color that I see in common is like earthy themes, but very like subdued. It's nothing like super bright contrast, no like big red colors or anything like that, no explosions. It's very calm.
Yeah, it's got a pretty muted color palette for sure. And yeah, so basically what I'm trying to say is, right, if you like good puzzles, tough bosses, good story that's like serious, this game is absolutely super awesome and I would very, very, very highly recommend it. And as far as a collector item as well, I mean, just the working designs packaging is really, really neat and cool. So yeah, really cool game to have, cool game to play.
Is there any software difference on those discs, or is it just the artwork on them that you have
I believe it's, as far as I know, is just the artwork.
Yeah, so you have to buy all of them if you want to collect them all.
Yeah, I'm not saying collect them all.
I'm saying if you wanted to, yeah.
Buy one copy and play it, whichever one you get, cool. But yeah, so my criticisms of the game were, the perspective every once in a while is just, it makes it more difficult than it should be, on top, and then also what I was saying about the translation. So, like, the translation is mostly really, really good. And I would say it's mostly better than average. Like, I really enjoyed how much personality the translation had to it, for the most part, I'm pro, like, they did a good job, right? But
just
every once in a while, the silliness is a little too silly for the sake of being silly instead of having an actual joke. And sometimes it's a little silly at extremely inappropriate times.
It's like someone on the writing staff like got the script as an editor and went, whoa, there's a big point of plot tension here. Have to break it up with humor. And then inject that shit into it, I don't know.
Yeah, something. But yeah, so just a couple. But I mean, when you're streaming it though, it kind of more comes off as a laugh though, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's so. Yeah, if you were just sitting there by yourself in your bedroom in the '90s playing that, it's like, especially if you were just a kid, I guess, with no, I don't know why you're playing Alundra as a kid, but if with no frame of reference to how like people interact with each other on a day-to-day basis, it's like that's how people talk. I don't know. That would throw me for a loop.
Mm-hmm. But there you go. Overall, really, really enjoyed it. It kind of blew my mind. I was like, wow, it's another game that I feel like I really should have played before, but I'm glad I played it now and got my full appreciation out of it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. One of the things I was thinking about, when you said if you wanted to play it, obviously you just buy one copy. But I'm thinking about it now, and it's like we're in a point in time where tech is catching up to us enough to where I feel like those who are still playing on a real PlayStation, the choice is either you are a collector and you want to own a whole lot of things physically if you're an Alundra fanatic, or you're just someone who's going to use no DE, which probably most people will anyway, because it's an expensive game. That's how I would plan to play it once I get to anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I am someone who is neither of those things. I wanted to play the game, so I bought a copy of it. I got this version of it. Cool, awesome. That's my version of it, and that's all the more there is to it.
I feel like I would probably find myself in that camp, but maybe not. Maybe not for a game that I know that I've never seen or played or heard anything about except for you talking about it. I want to know if I'd jump that deep into it, but I'd certainly give it a demo shot. But I was going to talk about Inscryption a little bit tonight, but I'm still okay. This is where I was last time. I actually thought I had, for the most part, almost beaten the game before, and then it turns out there's a whole nother universe that opened up in this game to me that I had no idea was going to happen. And without spoiling it, the game almost shifted genre, almost, and it's exciting to see where that's going to go. And I think I'll talk about that next time, because I think we're pretty much almost at the end of our 2-hour mark here, and I also really have to use the bathroom.
Sure. I was gonna say the only thing that I know about Inscryption is that it's a frog-like. It's a frog fractions like. Do you know what I mean by that?
No, but I'm loving someone calling roguelike frog-like.
So there was an old game called Frog Fractions.
No, I never heard of that.
It starts out as one thing and it becomes something extremely different, and that's kind of become a little subgenre of games that lure you in with one gameplay loop, and then when you think that you're getting far into it or maybe almost done with it, then the actual real game starts. That's a completely different game.
It's like a movie that kills its protagonist within like 26% of the way of the plot progression.
Yeah, and then you're like, weird. Oh, this is the movie. Right, yeah. Exactly.
Weird.
That's like a little subgenre of game, and I know that Inscryption is part of that, but I don't know what that means.
Have you played it yet?
No.
Okay. I
but
definitely don't want to spoil it then.
Maybe I'll give it maybe I'll play it a little bit this week or something.
Highly recommend. It's not multiplayer, so I think you'll like it already.
Oh, nice. Poggers. All right, let's go.
All right. Well, I think I'm all talked out. I don't think I have anything else.
Yep. Sounds good.
All right. Well, appreciate you all listening. Thank you so much for tuning in into the 35th episode of All the Way Down. We will be back in a to be determined amount of time.
All right. Yeah. Have a good one.
Y'all have a good one. Later.